Welcome to the Wander Creative Podcast, your guide to digital marketing. Journey with us as we navigate organic social strategies, discover the latest in paid advertising, and explore current trends in content creation. Your weekly roadmap to figuring out the ever-changing digital world starts now. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Wander Creative Podcast. We are so excited for you to be joining us. Today we are talking all about design. Design as it comes to your digital marketing, design as it comes to social media, design as it just comes to design. Today's episode is literally called Design at its Core. So we're going to be talking about so many different elements of design. We are joined, Dan, our Director of Digital Marketing, is here, as well as Abby, our internal graphic designer here at Wander Creative. So yes, first off, welcome to our viewers and listeners. We want to invite you into the conversation too. So if you have any questions or any comments or feedback for future episodes, be sure to drop it. But also welcome Dan and Abby.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I guess let's I feel like I say this, every time I'm hosting one of these, but let's just dive right on in. Right?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
So Abby, you're one of our newest employees here at Wander Creative, and you are also a killer graphic designer. So tell the world, all however many are listening and watching,
All the world.
the entire world.
Yeah.
Tell the world a little bit about your background, about kind of your background in design, your history of design, and how you kind of got into everything.
Great. Yeah. So I'll start from the very beginning. I was
Go way
homeschooled.
back.
You
There
were
you go.
born at...
I was born.
Yep.
I was born and then I was homeschooled. So really
Love it.
throwing that out there for everyone to judge. But I feel like because of that, I was raised to appreciate creativity. And I feel like my mom would just send us to art classes all the time. We would draw all the time. And I can't say I'm that good at it, but yeah, I feel like she just really emphasized that in our learning, which was so great. And then even just when we would go on vacation, I feel like she was always like, you guys, look at these mountains. Like, just look at these mountains. We'd be like on our phones or something. But just noticing that creativity and creation in nature is so important. And just learning to really appreciate the details of things, the way the light hits things, I feel like just really, shifted and shaped my perspective to see what's important. So it was made very valuable to me, which I'm very grateful for. Then I went to college and I studied graphic design, and I freelanced for a year before I moved to Nashville and worked at a small publishing company. And my role was primarily on the marketing side of things. So email, social, all the things, and then also running some photo shoots and doing product photography and all of that, which was fun to be able to combine my two loves. And so I worked there for like 4.5 years and then came to Wander, and it's a joy to be here because I feel like when I was working for one company, you kind of have one brand in mind, but being able to work for different clients is really fun because I feel like you're able to step into different brands, which is awesome. So yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And then obviously we were kind of going over some pre-show notes, and Dan joked, he was like, I have absolutely nothing to add to this conversation, so I don't know why I'm here.
Nothing.
But I feel like that is 100% not true because what people don't know is Dan has been at Wander since 2018. And one of the reasons I actually hired Dan was because he obviously had a great resume in his interviews. He had just the most fun and infectious personality, which you have probably already heard from these first few episodes of this season and all of last season. But one of the things that really stood out to me was he also provided a handful of graphic design elements. And, at the time, it was literally myself and a part-time person, and we were looking to hire our very first full-time person, which was going to end up being Dan. Yeah. And so I literally was just like, I need someone who can kind of do a little bit of everything. And so Dan, even though he doesn't call himself a designer, he does have some design in him. Like, he definitely has that background, that history in him. So I think that, you're going to be able to have some contributions to this conversation for sure.
Thank you. You can just, Abby, correct me if I'm wrong on stuff. I'll be like, actually, I think this about design. You're like, that's not true. Don't take his advice on it. But I appreciate that.
So one of the things that we do, Abby, you just mentioned it, we work on a lot of different brands, a lot of different accounts and account types. And I feel like one of the first things that we always do when we get a new account is we always try to sit with the brand. We always try to look at what brand assets they have, whether that's a logo or even like historical marketing collateral, whether that's posts on social media, and all of the different things that they already have. And if they don't have it, then we try to walk through it with them to try to develop it. But especially when we're kind of thinking about those brand assets, the marketing collateral, the social post, the logo, all of that, how important are those elements? And especially when you're starting to talk about the underlying things like color and elements, like how much does all of that play into design, and why is that important?
Yeah, I mean, it's very important. I would just, as I was thinking about this, I just kept coming back to the phrase that like design is just visual communication. So all of that plays into it. So, I mean, you have a message, whatever you're trying to get out, and design will either hinder that and confuse your audience, or it'll enhance your message. So I think just recognizing that all of those things play into it. So, I mean, if you're talking about like color, what feeling does it evoke and all of that? Because bold colors can show such passion or immediacy and excitement. But then there's also those muted colors that can convey something totally different. So I think just recognizing that all of that is very important, and just trying to think back to, okay, what does my brand represent? What am I trying to communicate? And every single thing that you choose in a design or with colors or whatever, it should all, point to that message.
Yeah, I love that. I kind of look at the Wander logo and the Wander design even as kind of an example of the next thing I want to kind of dive into. I had an iteration of, so for those of you who don't know what the Wander logo is and what the Wander mark is, basically it is the words Wander Creative, but then there's like a little emblem, a little icon that's kind of 3 bars that kind of make out a W, but in kind of like an upward trajectory thing. And those 3 little shapes right there, I feel like play such a integral role in kind of even just telling the story of who we are and what we are trying to accomplish. And what was interesting is, I think in about 2019, a previous art director of ours actually tweaked the logo. And at first I was kind of like, oh, what was wrong with the old logo? I thought the old logo was great. But literally the only difference that he kind of made was he switched. Before there was kind of a thin shape that boxed the W, and it literally was more of like the first bar was high, the second bar was a little bit lower, and then the third bar was the highest. And all that he did was he went and made the border around it thicker. And then he made the shapes to where they actually like made that one trajectory. And I feel like those 2 elements, as little and subtle as they were, they made such a statement in the logo design. And I think that just goes kind of be a testament of how shapes can play a role in logo design. And so I guess kind of talk to me a little bit more about the importance of shapes within a logo design or a brand design, and kind of how that can really tell a story and a narrative.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. When you're looking at the Wander logo, there's that emphasis of growth and kind of pushing brands forward. So you're getting all that communication, even if you don't think about it. The first moment you look at it, the more you get to know the brand, it's all enhancing that message. So I think that's just very important. And then if you think of another logo like the Nike logo, which is like a wing, but it also communicates motion. Like all of it kind of points back to who the brand is. And I think that's just very important to think about that. And also just with hierarchy, kind of what's most important in the information you're trying to convey, like thinking about that with the shapes too. But
how does all of that kind of go into, I guess let's like go to the very beginning. Like if a brand is looking to create a logo, where do they start? What are some of the things that they should be thinking about? And I'm even thinking like as someone who might not be a creative, like where do they go to gather inspiration, things like that? Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory, but I would say even Pinterest is just a great option. Just going through, creating a board, a mood board of what you're what style you're really going for. And I feel like that's helpful, but making sure you're not getting super attached to any of the designs, because you definitely don't want to copy one completely, but just kind of getting that feel for what's the style, what am I trying to communicate here with my brand. And then even just thinking through keywords or objects that you feel like represent your brand, and kind of thinking of that as like an icon that you could use in the style that you want. I feel like that's a good kind of place to start. And then even thinking through fonts and the name of your brand itself and kind of all of that I feel like is a good way to get inspiration. But I mean, also just looking outside of your normal sphere of influence, I think is really important, because it's easy to look at if you're a musician, look at what other musicians in your exact genre are doing, but kind of looking outside of that, like going to art museums, looking at just important things in nature and kind of seeing what you can pull out that speaks to you and your message.
I think a question I have too that's kind of like on this is, I know that kind of from the marketing standpoint, we have a way to kind of convey what we think would be best for marketing your message or your brand or whatever. But from a design standpoint, have you found it to be true that it's like, is logo design more important for someone to just say like, no, this is what I want? Or how important is it to like also trust the designer? And like, where is that line of like, designers do know what conveys certain messages, that's what they're pros at, but also they respect the desires of the client. Like, is there a line there? And like, kind of like where does that line
For
lie?
sure. I feel like there's a balance, because the client knows themselves, like they know themselves and they know what they really want. So a designer's role is really to problem solve and to kind of figure out the best way to communicate their message, but in a way that is visually interesting and is even just like kind of on trend. So I feel like it's definitely a dance there, trying to figure that out. And that's something that I think all designers wrestle with, is how far to push it. And
So you have the freedom as the client to say, no, like this isn't like if you get a first draft of mock-ups for an ad that a designer did,
for sure,
you have the freedom to be like, no, that's not quite what I was talking about. Let's change.
For
XYZ.
sure.
Cool.
Yeah. And I was even watching part of a documentary with Paula Scher, who's a great designer, like one of the most famous American designers, but she talks about how there's kind of this trajectory of a few revisions kind of helps you see the client's perspective and kind of push it further. But then there comes a point where there's so many revisions that it's kind of just pulling away from that original message. So I think there's definitely a balance there.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. I feel like there's been a couple of different projects where, and this is probably more toward, especially people who might not be creatives, or maybe they are creatives and they're just coming from it from the client perspective. There's been so many times where I feel like I will try to throw several different things kind of on the wall in that first round. Like I'll try to do, we've walked through it on a few different projects where we will usually try to give 2, 3, or 4 different, very different feeling designs. Like, they're all going to kind of feel intertwined because we have a feeling of where they're going. But I always want to try to do like something that's very minimalistic, something that's very kind of that almost like a grunge type look, and then something that might be like just completely off the wall, like based on what they're, whatever the client is asking for. And I always feel like that first round, and I've even had clients come back and say, hey, like this isn't really what we were looking for. And I think what it really is that design process of just trying to find like, here is kind of a direction that we're going. Like obviously it's not going to be anywhere near finished product. But it's just so interesting to kind of think through that process and trying to figure out and interpret what the client is wanting and what the design needs to say.
For sure.
Dan, something that we talked about in last week's episode that I feel like this kind of goes back to is we talked about finding those interest-based targeting of, hey, I might be a country artist who likes trucks and I don't remember the different artists that we use as an example. But, I might sound like this artist, but not like this artist. So I guess one of the things that I kind of am curious about too is, as people are going and finding inspiration, is there something to be said about that, to where like, oh, I want to be something that resembles this brand or this influence, but I know I'm not this influence, and then but I also want to be my own thing. Like,
Yeah.
how do you kind of walk somebody through that process?
Yeah, well, I think it's a really good point you said of just kind of giving them options. I feel like it's really helpful. A lot of times, depending on who you're speaking to, they're either really creative and can envision it, or it's a little bit harder for them. So I think just giving them that visual representation is really helpful. So if they give you information of like, here's the title, here's the colors I'm going for, but I love this style of illustration, and you put them together, I feel like sometimes it's an aha moment of this is either really working or it's not. So I think just kind of throwing that out there is really helpful, and just kind of testing it, like you're even talking about A/B testing with all of that. I feel like it's the same way with design. You kind of got to see what the client's envisioning, and I feel like, I mean, you can say, I want bold colors, but that's hard to know what that actually looks like until you're testing it out. So I feel like that gives you a lot of direction.
Yeah, for sure. I guess question kind of for both of you guys. What would be your personal favorite part about design or the design process? Or, yeah.
You want to go first? You want me to go?
Sure, I can go. I think just knowing that there's something creative in all of us, and we all have that like innate creativity, and each designer has something different to bring to the table. I feel like it's really just good to know that collaborating and learning from others is so important. I mean, even one of my friends who's a designer is so strong in type design. So I feel like just looking at her work is so helpful. And then another friend who's just so good at illustration. So that definitely pushes me because I lean more in the photo design side of things. But then also just, I mean, all creatives like you, Dan, and Asa on our team, just seeing the way that everyone has their different spin on it is really helpful. And I think it's just a sweet thing to realize that, I mean, that I'm not fully skilled to go at this alone the rest of my life, but there's a lot of collaboration and things that I need to learn from others.
Yeah, I love that. I think what's really interesting to me is I love that it's subjective. I love that there is no like this. I mean, there is like, this is correct to what classical design should be or how you should, go about this. But I just love that. I mean, it's like flavors where different people find things so good. And I've seen minimalistic designs that I love. I've seen maximalism that I've loved. I think it's all really cool. And I love that there's you can be inspired by so many different things to create different stuff. I mean, I've seen like these absolutely just insane designs with a lot going on. I'm like, wow, that really fits that brand, that item.
Sense.
That's so cool. And then certain things that are just so clean and crisp that it makes you drool a little bit, you're just like, that's good. So I do love the fact that there are so many different appeals to design, but that I can always be encouraged by I'll see other people's design that's way out of my realm.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa, I didn't even think about going about it that way. And then that inspires you to then go and try to create based off that. So I just think it's really neat how many flavors there are to it.
For sure. And it's just such a joy to be creative. I feel like it's such a fun profession. You're always problem solving and you're always kind of pushing yourself to see how can I be better. And even just like I said, working for one brand and then moving to different clients, it's definitely like pushing me to learn like, okay, this is the style that the client really prefers. Like, how can I push myself further? So I think it's an ever changing thing and kind of also trying to stay on trend and all of that. But it's just a really fun thing.
Well, and the reward too is like, I love that. I mean, obviously that from a professional standpoint, the clients are happy. That's a goal. But I love that personally, it's like your reward is there's something that looks nice. Yeah. And, I think like, I just feel like there's a very much so a stepping back and like seeing that it is good. You know what I mean? Like that element of like, oh, wow, that's sweet that we are able to create and that.
And make beautiful things.
Yeah. And there's like a reason behind why we do that.
I love that.
So this might be both controversial between the table and also our listeners, but is design a science or an art?
Oh, Matt slapping us with a crazy philosophy question.
Because
right.
Dan, you said earlier, you were like, well, when you're looking at like design from kind of a classical technical standpoint, there technically are like there's the rules of thirds, there's the rules of color theory, all of that stuff. But then I feel like there's so much feel and technique to it as well. It's like finesse. Like, so is it an art or is it science?
What would you say?
I mean, I would have to lean art.
Yeah, me too.
But I don't know. I mean,
I feel like when it gets into like typography, I feel like it's definitely more of a science because there's reasons behind just all the different forms of a letter that make it very legible, but
Yeah.
you can push that and it would be art. So
Well, yeah, by typography, you mean papyrus, right? Is that what
totally.
you're-
I'm
that's-
obsessed.
Comic Sans.
Yeah, that's
I'm
it.
obsessed.
That's all I use.
For sure.
That's all we use at Wander. Actually, it's the only one. Not. That's
Scary.
not true.
Definitely
That's
Scary.
not true.
That
Yes,
is definitely
just
not
to make
true.
sure everyone
Yikes.
knows.
Yeah, that was a joke.
Dan's job was short-lived.
Okay, yep, bye.
All right, see ya. Dan, actually, we don't need you on this one. No.
And speaking of controversy,
Yeah.
Dan, you've been
Yikes.
you love AI recently. So do you want to
He's obsessed.
yeah you want to lead us out with the last question of the day?
Oh, I would love to. How is AI playing a role in design? Are we handing off creating to our creation, or do you believe we will always be the true artists?
Love that we're ending it on such a hard question.
I know.
It's scary.
Right?
I think it's definitely exciting and scary all at once that it's becoming so prevalent. But I think it definitely has a lot to learn right now in order to become a little bit more of a stronger player. But I mean, like I said before, I feel like being creative is just something that's innate in all of us, and just using the skills and abilities we have is something that, I mean, gives us drive for life, honestly. So I don't think creativity will ever stop flowing from us. So I think we're definitely there's gonna be a human element, because I feel like it's something that, yeah, we just all love.
I'll say I love AI so much, but to your exact point, so far, a lot of the images that I've seen that are like fully AI created, there's a thing about it where
Something's
you're like,
off.
that was AI.
Yeah.
You know, like there's just an element. It can do some amazing stuff, and I love using it. But you're right. I think there's just a lot to go still.
Yeah.
And maybe down the road that will actually answer the question of
Is
is
it good
design science
Oh.
or creative? Because I do feel like
It's
computer,
kind of
if it's science,
Yeah.
a computer eventually will be able to figure out science.
Sure.
That's
But
true.
But will it
will
ever
it-
be able to
I don't think it'll
perfect
ever
it?
be able to perfect creativity.
Because to your exact point, all it's doing is borrowing creativity that we've made.
Yes.
Which is
It's
exactly
not
what it does
generated
right
on
now.
its own.
It like
Right.
you
Yes.
you say I want to insert a
Right.
boat right there.
And they say, okay, we'll take from content that's been created.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By humans,
And then, yeah.
not
Yeah.
machines.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's
interesting.
a great point.
Fascinating.
Well, and I guess another question is, can we create or can we only borrow?
Oh well, now I feel like now we just went into very philosophical. Like this
yeah,
is
for sure.
Wow.
This is
I'm
deep.
stunned.
Wow.
What's the quote? It's like good artists borrow, but great artists steal, or something like that.
Yeah, something along those
I
lines.
don't-
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know.
But some designers won't like that. They're like,
Yeah,
don't
true.
steal my
Like,
work.
no, yeah, please
Please.
do not. It's called
Yeah,
copyright.
yeah, copyright infringement.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're all learning all of these
Crazy.
principles and beautiful things from what's already around in creation. So,
Right,
I mean,
it's
it's all
true.
kind of borrowing anyways. But
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
exactly. Awesome. Well, any closing thoughts before we wrap up the episode?
I don't think
Design
so.
is good.
Design is good. Design is art.
very good.
Yes.
Yes. with a little bit of science.
Little bit of
just
science.
Touch
peppered
a
in there.
sprinkle.
Some rules. You
Yeah,
need some rules.
yeah.
Sprinkle of
Exactly.
it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. And until next week, design away. I
Yeah,
don't know.
stay creative.
Yeah, stay
Yeah.
creative. There we go. All right. Thanks for joining us for the Wanda Creative Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you missed any of the highlights, don't worry. You can get all of the show notes at wandercreative.com/podcasts. And while you're there, sign up for the digital drop to get new episode alerts and also receive the latest digital marketing news, tips, and tools delivered straight to your inbox. Until next time.